Obstinate.
You can't start the recording.
So it's already started. No, I had a massage today. I wouldn't want to hurt my back. Plus, when you're a big guy, the way you win any fight is just to fall on the person. Bones will very likely break. So just kind of grab them and try to get them to the ground and make sure you land on top of them. Doesn't matter what your skill level is or anything like that. I mean, if their skill level's crazy better than yours, then it doesn't matter. I mean, like, I might be bigger than some of these guys than the UFC fighting and stuff, but I'm pretty sure they would knock me out in a matter of like a couple of seconds. So I probably just wouldn't even try. Like, I would just probably sit in the corner. That way I didn't at least hurt myself worse falling. I'm pretty bright. I like to think that I would line up the situation and kind of understand what's going down. Those guys are brutal. Some of those UFC guys. All right, can somebody get the lights for me, please? Okay, so we want to do a couple of things here. Last time we were working out of our, I believe, app delegate, right? For testing our parse code. So what we did is we brought in all those frameworks. We did all the stuff that their little quick start thing told us to do. It took 5 minutes, but was pretty easy to do. We set our application ID, so this is a unique ID and a unique client ID for this particular application for talking to our hosted app on Parse. This was the thing to turn analytics on for this. We haven't looked at that yet, so that's just a line we put in there. But this is where we actually were doing our query. So we were querying something with a class name rollObject2, and then we added some extra keys to the query. So what we want to do today is we want to figure out how can we save roles for this particular device. Does that make sense? For this particular copy of the app, if you will. So for right now, we're going to do this in a less than unique way. We're going to come up with a special string. So let me, it's a Dane string all over again. Let me get into... Okay, so I'll just let that finish loading in the background while I keep talking about this. So what we discovered at the end of class last time is we want to build a query. Okay? It's going to be a PF query. And I'm guessing that's a parse something query. Whatever F stands for in that. And we're going to do query with class name. So if you've had SQL, if you've had a database class, it's like we are selecting something from a certain table. Okay, so we're selecting something of a certain class type. And we called this guy rollObject2 because we were messing around. Didn't we break our role object, the first one, because we called it description instead of DESC? Okay, so we're pulling something in rollObject2. But we then add some stuff to our query. So this is the equivalent of SQL for parse. So we said, let's add something to our query before we actually get our results from our query. We're going to say where a certain key, for instance, name, is Simon2. And then we actually get the query. So just to review that, I'm going to come into Access Dashboard here. Oh man, I've had 38 requests this month. I'm almost up to my million. Okay, and actually, just out of curiosity, let's just see what the analytics shows us for this.
Do you have to like put in a credit card to do this, and then
Nope.
they automatically take it out?
Nope.
Or will if it does get over a million,
It'll stop feeding.
Stop,
Yep.
So it just won't work.
Yep. No credit card. Just give you a million requests a month, a million pushes per month, and no more than 20 per second. So if you have 4 zillion versions of your app out there all trying to hit the parse server, they're not going to be happy. and their free version is not going to let you do that. But no, it literally takes 2 minutes to sign up, and you don't have to give them any. It's like an email address and your name. So to do your homework, you will not have to come up with a credit card to put in there. Okay, so anyways, let me go back here real quick.
How hard would it be to like have a free version of this app and only put like a limit of that you can only send, I don't know, 20 things to the cloud?
Well, what do you mean? Like if you're using Parse? So if we're going to use Parse, how hard would it be to create Puppet PM to control how often it talks to the cloud?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we're gonna do that to an extent.
And like if you wanted to have a free version, only do a maximum of 20, and then they have to buy the full one or something like that.
Yeah, you can do that. Like let them use the app up to a point. Like here's full access to the app. You can do 100 requests, 100 things or something, and that gets you a feel for how the app works in its full state. But after you're out of 100, then it doesn't work anymore. I probably would say that's not the right way to do it. I would say the right way to do a free app to give them a full trial of the thing would just be put a time limit on it. So maybe give them a 5-day trial. So when the app first launches for the very first time, you store something in NS user defaults with the initial timestamp when the app was first launched. And then every time the app is launched after that, it gets the current time. And if it's beyond 5 days and you haven't signed up, everything gets shut down. You just don't let anything work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's probably the better way of doing it than limited on number of requests. Otherwise, somebody might be in the middle of testing it, but because they were testing one thing too much, they ran out of requests or something. Give them 5 days and okay. So in any case, that's what analytics there looks like. But we're going to be, for right now, we're interested in the data browser. So inside the data browser, we have some role objects. And what I really want to do is I'd like to get these guys deleted. Oh, drop class. That's what I want to do. All right, so we'll come back to that in a second. Because in the end, I want to actually call it a role object. That kind of makes sense. We don't want to have role 2, role 3, role 4. So we'll see in role object, we have a bunch of role objects. So we have, each one has a unique object ID. This is just something it generated for us. Then we have a description and we have a name. So notice we have 2 of them with name Simon. Okay? And what I'm doing here is I'm saying, I'm going to do a query on role object 2, and I want to make sure I constrain that query to only pull objects in whose name is Simon 2. That makes sense? Now let me go back to the documentation here. And here's our query class. Okay, I think this is basically what we want. Okay, yeah, that's what we want. So, we know we're gonna get 2 rows back for this one, right? So we have another method in here called find objects. Looks like this guy will do what we needed to do. Just real quick, let me make sure that that data browser has, we have Simon 2 and Coleslaw 2 here. I'm just gonna add a row. And so as if I saved this, so I'm going to put a Simon 2 in there. And then we're going to put the description as blah. All right. And then I'll add another one too. So this is your way of going in and putting in data into your data store without having to save it first from the another Simon 2 and There, Rise. Looking forward to that game. Okay, so now I should have 4 different rows inside of my role object 2 data store. We see that pretty good? That's fine. With 2 of them having a description of coleslaw 2 and another one having Rise, another one having blah as the description. So we should be able to tell that we got 4 separate things. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into our code. So we're going to start off by creating a query on role object 2. Then we're going to constrain that query to only get objects whose name key, is equal to Simon2. Then we're going to create an NS array. Here, I'll do NS mutable array since we like those. We'll just call it the roles. And this guy is going to be equal to query find objects. And then we're going to say while, or actually, we'll say for PF object pointer a role in the roles, we're going to print out the name and the description. All right, so I'm going to hopefully read in all the role 2 objects whose name is equal to Simon2. Read them into a NS mutable array called the roles. What's this guy complaining about? Fine, you want me to call this an NS array? Read it into an NS array called the roles, and then go through each element in that array, which should have 4 things in it, because we have 4 different role 2 objects with the name Simon2. And for each one of those, we're going to print it out. So we'll print out name and description. So we should get 4 lines printed out, all with a name Simon2, but 2 of them with coleslaw 2 as the description, and then a Rise and a blah. If we have proven that we've gotten only certain pieces of information from our data store. Does that make sense? So let's go ahead and try to run this and see what goes down. I think this will work. It's my first time calling find objects. It's exciting. There we go. 4 things. Okay, so pretty easy to pull things in from the data store that matches a certain criteria. Now, we have an issue here though. For our Puppet PM, if we have 10 people using this app, each person is going to have their own version, their own role objects associated with their app, right? So if I'm using the app, I might create 3 roles inside of my app that I want to store to the cloud. Simon might create 7 roles for his Puppet PM thing. We are 2 separate users. I don't want his roles to be showing up in mine just because the names match. Does that make sense? And he doesn't want my role showing up in his just because the names match. We need to have some way of uniquely identifying our version of the app from everybody else's. Does that kind of make sense? All right, so just to make this simple for right now, there's actually a way we can get a unique identifier for a device. But we're just going to create our own unique identifier. So inside of AppDelegate, we are going to, well, we're eventually not going to do this inside of AppDelegate. We're going to actually do it someplace else. But for right now, we're going to go in and we're going to create a brand new object. So we're going to get rid of role object. So we'll drop that class and everything is in there. We'll get rid of role object 2. Drop that class and everything is in there. And get rid of test object. That way we can start from scratch. We're going to create a new class. So we're going to create a class called role object. All right. And role object is going to have several pieces of information. So we can have a bunch of different kinds of pieces of information here. We can have string, number, boolean, blah, blah, blah. For right now, we're just going to store strings. So I'm going to have a string, and this guy is going to be called device ID. Okay? I would have expected to see something up here. We'd have to do it under. Yeah, it is. I guess I need to set it in here. So then a name. And then a description. Type string. Okay. I probably would have preferred for these things to be in a better order, but whatever. Okay. So we'll go ahead and we'll add a couple of these. So we're going to say our device ID here. We're going to go ahead and steal our Dane string. Because that's what the cool kids are doing, right? Actually, we're not going to do that. I was so happy. Okay, so we're going to have a device ID 1. And we're going to say name, Mike, description. Actually, hold on. We're going to say name, dev, description, a developer. Okay, so that's our first row. We'll go ahead and add another row. Also with device ID 1. Name, design, description, a designer. Okay, so imagine that we just had somebody come in and create, download Puppet PM, and they created a couple of roles on their app. And their unique device identifier came out as 1. 1, 1. Okay? In the future, we're probably going to actually have them log in, because with this, if you lose your device identifier, you actually lose all your data. So if you go get a new app and you get a new device, but this at least allows us to take a baby step and uniquely identify 2 devices. Okay, so we're going to have 2 pieces of information. We're going to say this is my collection of roles, okay, as opposed to Simon's. So we're going to create another row, and this row is going to have a device ID 2. That's Simon's device. That's Simon's copy of Puppet PM. All right, and he's going to have a guy in there called Dev with the developer. We'll add another row, device ID 2. Let's see. Simon has dancers on the payroll. What kind of dancers? All right, so that's then we're going to add another row for device ID 2. And let's see, what else does Simon have? I don't want to type that. He has assassins. Did I spell it right? 2 S's? Like that? Is that spelled right?
2 S's and an N.
Like that?
Yeah.
And his description is just death. Okay? So, the roles that exist in Device ID 1's company is developer and design. The roles that exist in Device ID 2's company or project is assassins, dancers, and devs. Okay? So now what we can do is we can select, instead of on name, we can select on device ID. This make sense? So when I come back in here, I'm no longer going to say where name is equal to Simon. I'm going to say where device ID is equal to 1. Give me all the guys where device ID is equal to 1. And we'll go ahead and print out. Oh, hold on. Is device ID correct? Oh, sorry. It's not role object 2. We renamed it to role object now. We dropped role object 2. There we go. So for device ID 1, we have dev and design. Okay? And then for device ID 2, we should have the 3 things. Developer, dancer, death. Make sense? So now a version of the app, a copy of the app, can uniquely identify himself. So when I launch my Puppet PM, I can pull in the roles that are associated with my app. When Simon launches his copy of Puppet PM, he can get the version of roles that are associated with his app. Okay? And you could actually make this work without a login, where just maybe when you first come into the app, you have to enter in your unique 4-digit code or something like that. Probably more than a 4-digit code, since, you know, if you have too many people using the apps, there might be a chance that a bunch of people have 1111 as their you're just pulling in crazy amounts of roles. Because obviously this will be an app of the week type of project. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so in any case, this is how we set our initial application ID. So we're always going to do this inside of appdelegate.m. And we're always going to set up the analytics inside of appdelegate.m. This other crap we have here, we're probably going to do someplace else. All right, so where do we want to deal with roles? We want to deal with roles inside of our manage roles.m. Okay, and we're going to have to import parse.h inside there. So any place we want to do parse stuff, we need parse.h. So we'll leave them here in appdelegate.m because we need to do 2 pieces of information here, 2 things. We'll go over to manage roles.m, and why don't we just, for testing purposes real quick, go into view did load. We'll paste all that code in there that we had before, and we need to come up here and make sure we import the right crap. Okay, so now we're in a whole different part of our app, and the original guy which is called my array AR because we already have our roles in here. All right, so inside of view did load, we'll go ahead and create our query on role object, create our constrain it on device ID as 2, read it in, and prove that we can access that same crap here in view did load without having to first identify. You know, we've already identified ourselves. All right, and that happened inside the appdelegate.m. right here, the set application ID stuff. Okay, so now we'll run this again, and we shouldn't get any output here until we actually get into the manage roles screen. So I'll click on manage, then manage roles, and that's when we actually hit parse to pull our data. Make sense? Okay, now as of right now, when we save, let's go to manage roles.m. Right now, we're keeping track of 2 pieces of information. We're keeping track of the role strings, and we're keeping track of the roles. The roles is an NS mutable array of role objects. The role strings is an NS mutable array of Dane string delimited roles. Name description pairs, right? Well, we no longer want that. We're going to say that our app has no local storage. Everything, it has to be online in order to work. Okay? So we're going to get rid of the whole idea of local storage. So we'll get rid of the role strings there, which should then create a whole bunch of other errors for us.
Natural.
And the whole reason I did that is because now it's easy to go find out where all the places are that we're using that. So, inside of Manage Roles VC, we are currently getting our defaults. Well, we don't want that anymore. We also don't want the role strings. We don't want any of this crap. Simplify this up. Okay. The roles is an NS mutable array. Great. And we're going to ultimately fill that up with role objects. But we want to get our role objects from the cloud, not from our NS user defaults. All right. So our constructor is where we were heavily using the role string. So we got rid of all that. So now what do we do inside of our constructor? We just create a blank NS mutable array called the roles. That has nothing in it at this point. We'll want to put some of our PF code inside here, or parse code. But let's finish getting things out. So now when we hit the save button for a new role, besides creating a new role object, which we're doing right here, and adding that to the roles, we're also setting role strings. Well, let's get rid of that. And we're also updating our defaults. Let's get rid of that. Okay? So now all things that allow us to have our data live between runs of the app are now gone. Okay. So what do we want to do here inside of Manage Roles VC? We want to get our roles from the cloud. So I'm going to grab all the code we just put down here. We'll bring it up there to our constructor instead of viewDidLoad. And we'll assume this is Simon's app, so we'll keep the unique ID and set it to. We're just hard coding that in there for right now. All right, and we go ahead and get our object. Now, for each of these guys, right now we're printing them out, right? We want to build role objects out of our PF objects. Does that make sense? Our PF object is actually the guy that has all the information in it. It has the name and the description and a couple of other things. You know, we proved that because we printed them out down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into role.h. And we're going to get rid of this init with string thing because that was what we had before for our Dane strings delimited role string, right? But I'm going to add another constructor. This guy's going to be init with PF object. Actually, let's just call it this. Init with PFO. All right. Now, it doesn't know about our PF object. Why? Because I need to import parse.h in here. So now he knows about that guy. Now we'll go and implement this constructor. So we'll just get rid of our init with string guy. Okay. Now, we already have a constructor in here that knows how to take in a name and a description, right? Do I know how to extract names and descriptions out of PF objects? I do. This is how I get the name, PFO, value for key name. So I'll say self init with name PFO value for key name and description PFO value for key description. I'll just call upon my other constructor and return that value. Does that make sense? So I can now create a role object given a PFO object or a PF object, where a PF object is what we receive from parse. So I'll pass it the PF object, pull out the name and the description from that, and ultimately create an actual role object just like we used before. Okay? So we'll come back into manage roles. So we'll go ahead and we'll query, get all of Simon's PF objects, and for each one of those guys, what are we going to do? We're going to say the roles add object. What object are we adding? We're adding a role, Alec, init with PFO object, a role. That makes sense? So what am I doing? I'm going to query parse, get all the role objects for this particular device ID, read them into this array, AR, go through that entire array, and for every PF object I find in there, I'm going to build a brand new role using that PF object. That's going to come into our role constructor right here as a PFO object or a PF object. And what am I going to do? I'm going to call my original constructor, the one that takes in a name and a description and as a parameter, passing it the appropriate values. That makes sense? Now, we knew our code used to work, right? We knew that once we filled the roles up with role objects, that our table view was all filled out correctly. I shouldn't have to do anything else. Right now, I should be able to run this thing and have those 3 roles show up inside my table view. Saving new things is still a problem. We don't know how to save things yet. But if I run this right now, it will pull my data from the cloud based off of Simon's device ID and load the 3 things into my table view. Because all my table view required is that the roles NS mutable array was filled up with role objects. I just built my role objects a little bit differently. I added a new way to build a role object. That is a second constructor that takes in a PFO, a PF object. That make sense? And I think I showed you guys this last time. The only reason I'm even calling this a constructor is because it happens to follow the naming convention of constructors, this init with naming convention. Because the reality is I'm actually calling my original constructor with the 2 pieces of information, and this is the guy that's actually giving a value to self and ultimately returning self. The secondary halvesy constructor just returns whatever that original constructor boiled down to. I'm not actually building a whole second constructor. I'm building the second guy in terms of the first guy. That make sense? Okay. Now we need to make sure we can update our cloud when we add new roles. So what are we going to do? Inside of manageRoles.m, after we create a brand new role, which is right here, and if you will let me for a second, I'm going to say role pointer temp is equal to this guy, and you'll see why here in a second. So I'll build my role there, then we'll add to the roles temp. But now I need to save my new role to the cloud. Well, how do we save things to the cloud? Well, Go back to Quick Start, iOS, scroll down. We can create a new test object, set our 2 pieces of information for that test object. So we will borrow that code here for a second. I'll paste it in here. So we're going to create a new role object. And this guy is going to be of type class role object. We're going to say role object, set object 2 for key device ID. And we probably would have had some sort of global variable for device ID somewhere. That way we didn't have to hard code 2 in a bunch of places. But for right now, this is going to be sufficient. Then we'll say role object set object temp get name for key name. And then set object temp get description for key DES, like that, right? DESC. And then ultimately save our role object. So when we enter in a new role, what are we doing? We're building a role object locally using our original constructor, the one that takes in a name and a description, adding it to our roles. Make sense? Then we are creating a brand new PF object for our role object, setting our 3 pieces of information, our device ID, our name, and our description, and then calling role object save. Make sense? So if this is working, what I should be able to do now is I should be able to run my app, add a new, I'll see the 3 original roles. I should be able to add a 4th role, save, everything seems perfect because, well, it's going to seem fine because right here is all I really needed for it to show up in my table view. The real test is if I close the app and relaunch it, did it stay? Did I read it back in from the cloud? That make sense? So we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll run this guy. Okay, what other role does Simon have? Slave, okay. He has a slave. This guy's a minion. We'll save that. Okay, so he's in our list now. Everything seems legit, right? But now we won't know if it actually is legit until we run this again. We could sort of kind of double check on it if we come up here and go to dashboard and look at data, or data browser. And we should see that we now have a slave in there. So we'll run this again. And there's our slave. That make sense? Okay. So what we want to do, I think all of your code right now is brought up to date so that it runs, brings in as user defaults, right? So rather than storing everything locally and bringing it back locally, now we want to store everything in the cloud. So for homework, for Monday, everybody create a parse.com account. Again, no credit card information required. Create your project on there. You can call it whatever you want. And bring your application up to date with what ours is, where everything is stored and retrieved from the cloud for roles only. Make sense? So basically, repeat what we did in class today after you set up your parse.com account. Questions, comments, concerns, bribes? All right. I'll see everybody on Monday. I'll go ahead and put this assignment up there. And I'll give you a link to the Parse website.
I don't know if I asked you this already. Do we bump on this?
Oh yeah, we're gonna go see that in Hunger Games tonight.
Right?